Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
And we have a guest with us today. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Zoe. I'm the founder of Evita's House, and I'm really happy to be on the podcast today.
Zoe, welcome. I ran into you at Lighthaven. You said that you were working in longevity, and I was like, oh my god, I have been wondering what's been happening in the longevity field for a while. It's been a while since we've done a longevity episode. You kindly said you would come on the podcast and talk about that a little bit, and also about some social aspects of what is happening in the tech scene.
Great.
First things first, how did you get involved in all this?
I'm actually coming from a computer science background. I used to be a software engineer. I spent a couple of years also in the blockchain space. But when I was studying computer science, I always knew that I wanted to work on something that has a direct impact on the lives of potentially millions of people, right? So I knew that I wanted to do biotech. And then at some point along the way, in the past 2 or 3 years, I got more familiar with all of these concepts in longevity, like, hey, maybe we can actually do something about aging. Maybe it's not an inevitability, right? Mm-hmm. That's a problem that made me very passionate to try to potentially help tackle because of the impacts that it might have, right?
Do you remember how you stumbled into this longevity aging thing?
Transhumanist friends, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, in fact, I was very skeptical in the beginning because my friends were, engineers, physicists, etc. Like none of them were coming from the bio field, and they were very radical. I mean, they were into radical life extension, saying things like, I am never going to die, I don't want to die, etc. Mm-hmm. And, from my side, it all sounded like bullshit. I'm like, you just guys have no idea what you're talking about. None of this is possible, and these are crackpot ideas. But then I started learning a little bit more. I actually started meeting scientists coming from the bio and medical sphere who actually believe that we might be able to do something about at least being able to decelerate aging and so forth. Some of them, there's a lot of debate here. Most people in the field tend to be quite conservative, but there's, a subgroup of people who are actually working on researching this. And some of them believe that we might be able to do something about it. And in fact, we do have some evidence that this is not completely futile, that this might not be a complete waste of time.
Do you happen to remember if there was a tipping point that made you think, okay, maybe this is serious, or was it just encountering enough serious people?
Yes, for me, it was definitely getting to learn about two things. First of all, some of the experiments that were done in C. elegans and also in mice that had very positive results. Some of them, I think, are tied to David Sinclair, who's a really big figure in the space, and Cynthia Kenyon also for C. elegans. The second one was learning about other species like the naked mole rat, which seems to have, like, for all organisms, our risk of death goes up exponentially as we age, right? It's exponentially correlated with time of living. But for naked mole rats, it actually seems to go fully flat at some point, which is kind of crazy. So there are some species that are not necessarily immortal, but they're sort of amortal. So they can still have all sorts of accidents, mm-hmm. but they do not, their bodies do not decay in the same way as most other animals do. And then there's also other very interesting cases like the hydra that has crazy regenerative capabilities. There are some salamanders, I think we all know that can regrow some limbs, right? So all of these species would be very interesting to study at the genetic level to see what insights can we come across that we might be able to implement into our own genes, right? I think the top one actually is, there's also some debate in this regard, but the realization that death and aging are not explicitly coded anywhere in our genes or the laws of physics. I'm saying this might be debatable because, you can argue entropy, etc. But I would say that set of three things was the one that really put me on this path.
That's awesome. I can't remember my first exposure to radical life extension. I want to say it was somebody non-credible like Michio Kaku. Mm-hmm. He was a science popularizer. He might still be, but he had this annoying habit of making highly specific claims that would be way too hyper specific. Oh yeah, we'll be able to make screens as thin as wallpaper, and people will be tiling their wallpapers around the country by whatever year. He could just narrow that down to saying tech's going to get cheaper and smaller, which is way more believable. But then I think it was Aubrey de Grey, and this would have been 15 years ago when he was in his early 40s, but still looked like Gandalf.
Yes. And he still looks exactly the same 15 years
great.
after.
He's proven that you can beat aging as long as you're willing to look like Gandalf your entire life.
Yeah, if you look
Yeah.
old and you're young, you just stay that age for a while. I appreciate the distinction too between immortal and amortal, because there's different versions of like backup technologies. That way, if you're crushed, and then you can just reboot from your most recent backups, so you're immortal that way. Not dying from illness or age is not the same thing as saying bulletproof.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
those are different problems to solve.
You said that we could possibly learn a lot by studying the genes of these animals. Are we not currently studying the genes of these animals? Is this something that still has to be started?
I haven't been following the specific research in these specific areas and how far along we are, but comparatively, in general, across all fields that are connected to longevity or geroscience or science of aging, we don't have that many people. There is not that big of a proportion of the talent that's specialized in the medical or biomedical field focusing on this.
Okay. They seem to focus on almost everything else.
On specific diseases mostly, yeah.
You said that your mind was also changed when you met certain scientists personally. How did you run into scientists and like have conversations with them?
I was lucky to meet some of those scientists who are a little bit more open-minded and interacting with social groups that I mentioned, right? People who are more on the transhumanist side, rationalist side.
Was it at a conference? Is it a friend of a friend that introduced you?
Yeah, it was definitely a friend group. Yeah. If you want to make your life interesting, just get close to very interesting people, and then other interesting people will show up in your life.
How do you get close to interesting people?
I was going to say by being interesting yourself, but that sounds very not humble. I don't know, have something that makes them want to keep you around.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what works for me. I don't think I do anything. I'm not a particularly interesting person, but you go to public places where interesting people tend to get together, places like Light Heaven or your local Les Wrong meetups, or the trick might actually just be meeting people in real life or finding the right small online insular communities.
I would like to be more specific. Actually, I do have a specific tip. So
Yeah.
Step 1 is you go and do a little bit of research on those topics that interest you. Second, when you meet certain people who you think might have more information on these topics or who might enjoy discussing some of these topics or learning about the stuff that you learned by researching them, maybe be more strategic with topics that you bring up. I feel like this is such an autistic explanation for how to go about making friends. But I think that works. Read about the things that you're interested in, at least at a surface level, and go and find people who want to listen to you. Yeah, you will find which ones know about these things. And then you make friends. Ta-da!
So you started talking to some scientists and you got interested in longevity. How did you actually parlay that interest into doing something?
Right. I had to ask myself, I know that I want to contribute to this field. I know that I want to potentially dedicate my life to this problem. Now, what do I do? Because I am not coming from a biology background. I'm coming from computer science, but I also don't want to do bioinformatics because by that point I was already kind of done with being a software engineer. I really thought I was going to be a software engineer for the rest of my life. But at some point, something changed. So I asked myself this question, right? Like, how can I contribute to the field considering that I'm not going into academia, for example. I'm not going to be the person doing research directly. And I also don't want to be a bioinformatician, right? I analyzed, okay, what are my set of strengths? How can I best contribute with the set of strengths and resources that I have? Throughout the years that I was a software engineer, I was increasingly moving on to more of the client management side, biz dev, right? Like I remember my boss would put me to talk to clients, would bring me to those meetings, and I was like, why is he doing that? Like I had massive imposter syndrome, but that was happening more and more often, right? So at the end of the day, what this means is that, hey, I do have great social skills. And also I started doing more community building, more event organization. And so I thought, how can I put all of these things together to contribute to the field? And so I came to the conclusion that the best thing that I can do is work on getting more talent and more funding into the field, because I also did a little bit of fundraising. At some point, that's how the idea of Evitas came to life, right?
What is this thing that you just said?
So Evitas House is a talent incubation house. We aim to incubate talent, not necessarily projects, although most people who are in the house are starting projects or working on projects of their own. But the idea is to help entrepreneurs, scientists, and even students who want to get started in the field or who maybe are already in the field but can use some help that we can help grow.
So this is one of the, to me, coming from a not San Francisco place, one of the crazy things about San Francisco that just feels like a weird, almost culture shock thing. And I guess if you've watched Silicon Valley, it makes a little more sense, the TV show. But people will just set up houses where a bunch of people live together that are sort of interested in the same thing. Is that what's going on here?
Wow, I got a massive flashback after you said that, because I remember before I came here, before I ever visited San Francisco, I would read about these houses like 2 years before coming here, and I was like, that is the dream, like a bunch of founders getting together, or a bunch of, I don't know, people who work in like media getting together, like, and thinking about all the collaborations that can happen there. I was fascinated, but I didn't really think that I was going to live in any form of like a hacker house. Last year, actually in Berlin, I had my first experience. It was a sort of techno, I think it started as a sort of EA house, but then it turned more into a techno-optimist house because half of the people there are now AI founders themselves.
Nice.
So,
wow.
Which is very ironic. That was my first sort of hacker house experience. It was really good. I got to see the value in it with all the connections that you make, even the guests that come to visit the house. The upside is massive.
So is the idea that when you're just living constantly with other people doing the same kind of stuff and thinking about the same kind of things, that these ideas tend to like bounce on each other and grow and all that?
Absolutely. And not just that. The residents also, bring friends or business collaborators. They come and, brainstorm or work on their projects at the house. That is very nourishing for the residents that are staying in the house. Then if you also go on to organize events, to host events, and you create a community in your city, it's almost a beacon for the type of people that you want to attract, or for the type of profile that you have in the house, because you attract more.
I think the group housing mentality sort of arose out of like two different things. Like, one is the entrepreneurial spirit of saying, hey, look, I'll let you guys live here or charge you some, way below base rent rate for rent, and then I'll get some equity in whatever companies you guys are making. But then also, because they can't build new places, it's like, well, if we want more people to live here, I guess we're going to shack up together and, put 8 of us in a 3-bedroom house.
Just thinking on things tends to be a really big force multiplier, and having a environment where everybody's thinking on the same things and you don't have the distraction of like, oh, but what about this latest season of Arcane that we just watched? And, oh, let's do this other thing. And I want to talk about this. Like, when everybody is thinking about the same topic, it seems to just magnify all the amount of thought that gets put into that thing. I've kind of noticed that about myself too. I left writer communities a couple of years ago now, and I just started doing much less writing. My brain wasn't constantly engaged with it anymore.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention that I did have a small selfish reason to start the house because then when I came to San Francisco, I also lived and visited a bunch of hacker houses or group houses. I stayed there. I got to learn so much. Like, it was like my learning process in bio and biotech was so efficient. I remember I had this problem. I was trying to think of how to set up a clinic in Prospera and what the best options are, because this is in the middle of quote unquote nowhere, like it's on an island, right? And so I was just like in the kitchen, like prepping coffee or something, and a housemate came in to, I don't know, like have breakfast, and we had a 30-minute conversation, and he basically solved my problem. He gave me like 3 solutions that I could pursue. And man, that would have taken me at least like 5.5 hours, maybe more of research on my own, not coming from the field. But since he's in that field, for him, it was super easy. So my small selfish reason is that after experiencing that, I said, wow, what must it be like to live in a house full of people like this every single day, where my serendipity surface is so high, both from learning about these things, but also for meeting other people like this. So yeah, my small selfish reason is that I knew that I wanted to learn more about bio. I wanted to go deeper, and I thought, wow, this seems like a very efficient way.
Sounds like a win-win.
Yeah. So you set up an actual group house for longevity research?
Wow, you made it sound very, very serious.
We're trying to save the human race here. Come on.
Yeah, as I said, like right now, the current cohort is more focused, I guess, on more, not necessarily commercial projects, but not so much like pure academia. We don't have pure academics in this specific cohort. I hope we get more in the next couple ones. It's a space to activate talent, I was going to say activate talent within the longevity space, but I also want to bring new talent into it. So
Okay.
accelerate progress in the longevity space by activating talent.
This is the thing that most still boggles me about San Francisco. Where does the money come from? How does this work? Are people paying for their rooms to cover all costs? Like, what's going on here?
It really depends on the house. In our case, this first cohort, I mean, we put it together in record time, so there was no time for fundraising. So in this case, it is self-funded.
Nice.
Right now we have a 7-bedroom house. One of the spots is for rotational guests because, as I said, that's very nourishing for the house. For 2025, we would like to host between 12 to 15 people.
That's a big-ass house.
I'm discussing with a friend, and he's looking at a 20-bedroom house. I'm like, that's literally crazy.
Yeah. That's you require a full-time staff person, at least.
Or two.
Or two.
Yeah. But I know of other houses who have raised to set up projects like this, but it's mostly for time-limited fellowship type of programs. So, for example, Bio Dojo House, they run these 8-week-long programs during the summer for early-stage scientists who are still in school, right? But I think most established group houses or hacker houses are bootstrapped, and maybe some of them are able to monetize through organizing hackathons and a couple of things like that.
The 8-week programs that you were talking about that are funded by grants, do they expect something back eventually? Are they like, if you do something good, give us 1% afterwards? Or is it just entirely kind of like...
Philanthropic?
Yeah.
So in this specific case, I think it's philanthropic.
Okay.
The ones that are more... fellowship or learning or education based, or especially the ones that focus more on academia. There's all sorts of models in San Francisco. I mean, this is freestyle. There's no blueprint here, In other houses, you can partner with VCs and offer like preferential investment for the startups that get born in the house. Yeah.
Right now in Avita's, is it Avita's or Avita's house? What's the official?
Yeah,
how should I refer to it?
Avita's house.
Avita's house.
No.
You have 6 people who are permanent residents?
Oh, no. The program consists of rotational cohorts. We started on September 1st. It's a 4-month-long pilot program.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's going really well, so we're definitely extending it. But the idea is to have, in 2025, basically 3 cohorts of 4 months each. And every cohort have new people coming in.
Huh. What do they do afterwards? Just find someplace else to live and start a job?
I mean, they are working while being here, right? This is not a program where we expect them to drop whatever they're doing.
It's just they live together.
Yeah. So basically, on our application form, we ask you, what will you be working on while you are at Avitas, right? And so we try to get a mix of different profiles, some more entrepreneurial, some more scientific, others that are earlier stage, because I think those can benefit the most from our help.
Is this common in San Francisco? Will people just like live 2-3 different places throughout a year and float from house to house?
It's not super common. I mean, we would definitely have more applicants if the program was longer. Most people obviously have a preference to stay in a place for a year.
The accelerator you get just from having people in the same domain near each other, that's a genius idea.
Imagine living in a house. You don't have to go online, on some forum and hope that you get some answer, or like on Twitter, some answers for your problem. You just see your housemates and they ask you, what have you been up to lately, etc. You're like, oh, I've been thinking about this. And then, we're all natural problem solvers here. So it's really easy to nerd snipe your housemates into trying to help you.
What's the average age?
Wow, average. I haven't really calculated it. I would say it's around 28, because I'm thinking that we have someone very young and we have 2 other people who are young, but not that type of young.
So like 40 years young, 30 years young?
Yes.
Okay.
Like maybe 42.
Are there any projects that have started there or developed there that have borne fruit or look promising or that you're most excited about?
2 people in the house. One of them is actually my co-founder, but it's really cool that they found somebody else in the house to do this with. They are looking into starting a longevity biobank.
What is that?
I mean, a biobank is like obviously a place where you store human samples of all kinds, so like blood and all others that could be helpful.
See, that's what it sounded like, but I would not have imagined that's a thing that actually exists.
Right. I mean, they're trying to create it because it doesn't exist with that focus. But
okay.
the reason why this is helpful for many reasons. Like one of them, obviously, you can collect periodic samples quite often for people who are following specific protocols, and then perform some research on that data. But the key one is encouraging anyone who is interested in longevity to make snapshots of their current state, so that in the future, if anything goes badly in their body, they are able to have that either as a reference or even to re-implant it into their bodies. So younger plasma or stem cells, or this is a euphemism, but microbiome samples. Those have been proven to have positive impact on delaying aging or potentially reversing some of it. I don't want to make any crazy claims here, but I think this is understated. I think most people are not aware that they should be doing this while they are young, to help their future selves 10 years down the line.
So 2 things. Our listeners, very world savvy. You can just say you should freeze your poop.
You should freeze your poop and your blood and your stem cells if you can.
And the other thing is that I think I've mentioned this once before somewhere, but
and maybe your sperm and your eggs too. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, eggs are much harder to get, but yeah. It had not occurred to me that when you're young, like somewhere in your 20s, you should get all your hormone levels tested and get a record that's somewhere, because when you go back much later in life and you're like, are my hormone levels off? The doctor would be like, I don't know, man. You didn't get them tested when you were in your 20s, so we don't know what your baseline is. Absolutely. Okay, so I have a friend. He thinks that the whole gut microbiome, field or topic is, again, severely underestimated. The impacts that it can have on health are severely underestimated. So he doesn't understand why more people are not starting, startups in the space or researching this a little bit more. But mainly he's thinking about it from the startup side. And so I explained to him that this is a very hard problem to solve, because unless you have a sample of the way your microbiome looked before when you were healthy, there is no reference, there's no standard, there's no specific set of values that your microbiome that should hit. The data's lost.
And so what I'm trying to say is you are your own reference. The variability is so big that you can't compare. You trying to make your gut microbiome look like mine might not work, right? So this is exactly what you were saying with your example. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as getting your everything measured as far as hormones and everything else in your blood. If the first time you get that checked is in your mid-30s, you're probably within range, they'll tell you, but the range is huge. And for all you or your doctor know, you were way above or below whatever you're currently at 10 years ago. And so in addition to giving a good snapshot record for a history for yourself, I also love the idea of just having backup preserved data of my whole genome, so that in the event that whatever the path to immortality looks like, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie The Sixth Day, where they just make a fresh copy of you, they could just make that from 25-year-old Steven over and over every 20 years, or whenever I get sick of the one I have, right? I would think that's probably not the only movie that's done this, but that's the first one I saw.
You're making me think of a different but related topic, which is human cloning. And I hope that is the future of regeneration. I would hope that would be the future of regeneration. We would not have to necessarily rely on the samples that we took when we were young and smart enough to take them. But in the case of things like the gut microbiome, still, I would assume that your clone might have a completely different one.
I actually have a clone, but we diverged at birth. As long as we're hitting that beat, do you think that cloning is actually a good viable path to immortality in a way that the individual person personally should care about? Because if I was cloned, I'd be happy that I'm existing somewhere, but as soon as that person leaves the room, they're having a different life than me, right?
Well, you'd have to have a brain transplant or something for it to actually be you.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yes.
And even then, some people would argue that if you were to transplant your brain into a different body with a different homeostatic state or something, that maybe you are not the same. So I think here we are entering into a more philosophical debate, right? Classic ship of Theseus.
I fuck up my homeostatic state every Monday evening anyway, so.
Why?
Because I go out dancing, and I'll usually take a little something.
Okay, but to answer your question, so I know you asked me a different question, and that one is a little bit more philosophical, and different people will give you different answers. For example, for me, if I have certainty that that copy of myself is identical to me, and all of my values, all of my memories, all of my attitudes, etc., for me that would count. I would still feel like I am alive, even if my current form that I'm experiencing right now were to die. But for many people freak out thinking about this scenario. They're like, no. I had this conversation a while back with my boyfriend at the time. He just randomly asked me in the car if you could if you could like teleport yourself somewhere, but to teleport yourself, to teleport yourself, they had to create a copy of yourself at the destination and kill your current copy. Would you say yes? And I said exactly what I said. Yeah, if I can make sure that that copy is identical to me, then yeah, why not? And he looked at me with the biggest, craziest eyes. He was like, "What?"
And that's when you knew you had to break up.
So it was very interesting to see the different reactions to this problem.
It's one of those great scissor statements where people feel very strongly, intuitively, that, well, this is obviously the case, and then they disagree on what actual path that they think makes sense.
Yeah.
To me, I've always been in your camp as well, that, like with most technologies, I would want to be not the first adopter.
Yes.
Let a couple people go through it and then tell me how it went for them, and then, sign me up for round 2.
You asked me if I consider this to be a feasible option or path towards potential rejuvenation. I will say that yes. I was part of the last longevity biotech fellowship, and they basically it's like 3 days intensive, going deep into different topics in longevity science. And so the 3 different tracks are bioengineering, whole body replacement, and the third one, even though it's not longevity per se, but kind of, is actually cryostasis, cryopreservation. I was assuming that the one that people in the field would be most bullish on was bioengineering, but actually it's replacement, because the technology to get to the point where we can, and by the way, this is related, the reason why I was thinking about this is also because this is related to cloning. Well, there's multiple paths, right? But one of the most interesting paths that we could pursue is basically organ replacement. And one way in which we could do this, since right now we don't have any feasible way to actually recreate organs, we have organoids which we use for some experiments, and that's great to have some data to gather more data more quickly for your experiments, but it's not something that you can organs with. Right now we don't really have a clear path towards regenerating whole organs, but there are different alternatives. One of them that I think all of us have been hearing about in the past couple of years has been xenotransplantation. So you can genetically modify pigs, right, to grow organs in a way that resembles ours a little bit more, and potentially test compatibility. So there was an experiment there. Unfortunately, the patient died, I think, after like 3 months. I don't fully remember, but that was a breakthrough.
It wasn't because of the organ, though, right? They were already dying.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, the authorities would not let you do that experiment. So xenotransplantation is one subfield within this field. But then another one, which is very interesting and very transhumanist, this is interesting, is basically growing non-sentient clones. We could potentially grow non-sentient clones for I don't want to call it organ harvesting. Organ generation. Organ generation, right? Yeah. And so this option would actually ensure maximum compatibility, because this would be coming from a body that is most genetically similar to yourself.
And this is what people are most excited about right now.
This and related technologies are one of the paths that seem most feasible at the moment to have an impact on aging through replacing certain organs or a group of organs. And then if you go a little bit more like deeper into this, a little bit more crazy, then you have people looking into potentially head transplantation in the future, right? But there's not that many people in that field for many reasons. It's hard to do research on any of these things.
The idea of growing non-sentient clones for organ replacement has all kinds of interesting problems. Like, if they age like we do, and I need a heart, well, I'm kind of fucked.
Oh, because you're going to have to wait like 16 years for it to get up to... Okay, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I need it to be big enough. It would need some sort of a brain to keep all the body working, including the heart pumping, to get strong enough for me to use it. And how much of a brain would it take to do that without it being awake, sentient at all, is a problem that I hope people answer before they start.
This was my first question when I learned about this. Unfortunately, I don't have like a really good technical answer, but my first question was, how is it possible? Because when I say non-sentient, it means, what I mean is that they do not have a central nervous system. Some of them do not have a brain at all. And so, seeing some of those pictures, the first question that comes to mind is, how is it possible that these bodies are able to survive? How is it possible that you don't need some form of central nervous system to control all the bodily or the organ functions, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't have a good technical answer for you, but that was also the first question that I asked, and they are somehow able to grow into maturity without this component.
Maybe if you're in a vat, all you really need is like the brainstem.
I saw that Rick and Morty episode.
Futurama and
Black Mirror.
Yeah, a lot of them do that. Yeah, and I mentioned I have a twin brother. I mean, so he and I have an agreement that we, of each organ that you have a pair of, we keep as spare parts for the other one. So should I ever need a kidney, he's got a backup. If he needs a lobe of liver, I can give him some of mine. And my wife and I share blood types, so I'm lucky there too.
Nice, very strategic of you.
We learned that just a couple years ago, actually. One consideration worth having when choosing a partner. Yeah, certainly having no brain would keep the sentience problem answered. But yeah, I wonder. There was one I remember seeing on TV back when I had cable. It would have been 15 years ago, where they were talking about 3D printing the scaffolding of organs and then using stem cells from the person to basically fit onto this. Is that a thing that anyone's doing, or did that ever pan out? And if it did, why did I hear about it 10 years ago and no one's doing this yet?
Yeah, as far as I know, the furthest we have gotten in this regard is organoids. And they tend to be just tiny versions that somewhat work kind of like the organ in question, but the results that you can get are very limited, because at the end of the day, an organ is not just an organ, it's part of a wider, more complex system, right? So there's no way for you to test how an organ works by testing the organ in isolation.
And that I guess raises the other point too, that even if you do have a fresh new heart that's all yours that is guaranteed to work, heart surgery is risky.
Yeah.
And you said organoid. Is that the ones that you grow inside other animals, or is that was that another term?
No, organoids you can grow on a plate. If you look them up, they don't actually look like the like the organ. Well, most of them.
They're like little chunks of the organ stuff.
Kind of.
As long as we're asking you specific questions, how do you feel about rapamycin and or metformin? Because those are the two I've been hearing the most about as in things that are accessible to actual normal people on the street that could have useful anti-aging properties.
Right. You are right, and I am proud of you for asking me about those two specifically and not something like resveratrol. But yes, so indeed, right now it seems that rapamycin is the one molecule that we are getting the best results or the most optimistic data from. Metformin, I think is a little bit less clear, but it also has some positive signals, and there's a really big study on the way by Nir Barzilai, who's a really big figure, doctor in the field, called META, if I remember correctly, and this is going to be a really big study, so we'll be able to get more conclusive results. But yes, those two are definitely the two most promising molecules at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. I know that metformin is actually pretty darn easy to get online. I have some right now. Rapamycin seems a bit harder.
Yeah, I have not tried to secure rapamycin myself, but this is also the perks of having longevity scientist friends or longevity-friendly doctors. Is not an issue. But also, if you want to buy metformin over the counter, go to Honduras.
Okay.
And then there's also other places that have it, but Honduras for sure.
Speaking of Honduras,
yeah,
you said that you were talking to a friend about setting up a clinic in Prospera or something. What's this about Prospera? What happened there? Were you there?
Yes. So I actually lived in Prospera for most of the year in 2024. I
Holy
lived there,
shit.
yeah, for 6.5 months this year. I think I'm one of the few people I know who has stayed there that long.
I've only heard legends of this place. I would love to hear what it was like and any details you have that might be interesting.
I've heard all sorts of legends myself also, but it's probably not that crazy. So also for context, for anyone who might be listening to this who has never heard about this Prospera thing, it's kind of a libertarian. It's not even a city. It's really hard to explain. It's technically a ZEDE, a zone for economic development and employment. And I might explain a little bit later, can explain what that means. But let's call it a city for now. And this is on an island in the Caribbean called Roatan, which is right next to Honduras. It's actually a Honduran island. The concept of a ZEDE is you get an external body, an external party that is not the local government. So the local government gives this external party regulatory autonomy over a territory that then they are going to have governing rights over. And so they have a lot of freedom in setting up all sorts of regulations. They can, for example, implement regulatory frameworks, and this is the sort of main attractor, because by doing this, by creating basically regulatory sandboxes, they are able to attract foreign capital. They are able to create a thriving microsystem, create many more jobs, etc., with much less constraint. This is what Prospera is, and the reason why I was in Prospera is because at the beginning of the year I started working with Vitalia, because I decided that I finally want to work full-time in longevity. And well, Vitalia is right at the intersection of crypto or blockchain.
Vitalia being the guy who basically founded Ethereum, right?
Oh, no, that's Vitalik.
I'm sorry.
No. I get this question all the time.
Okay.
And it's very funny because there's some correlation, but Vitalik is not directly involved in Vitalia, but it's very funny.
Okay.
So Vitalia, well, they have multiple components, but they build longevity districts in areas with special jurisdictions, such as Prospera, because they aim to leverage these jurisdictions for biotech.
Okay.
And as part of that, they build a sort of ecosystem of their own with residential area. They also want to open up clinics and labs. They also have a sort of accelerator over there and a pop-up city.
Okay, so hold on. So is Vitalia is it a company? Is it a philanthropic organization? What is it, just like two people with a dream? What is Vitalia?
I mean, aren't all startups two people with a dream or one or three?
Yeah.
So it is a startup.
Okay.
So it started as two people with a dream who, funnily enough, they met at the first ever pop-up city, who was organized or funded, or I don't know how he wants to describe it by Vitalik Buterin, who is the founder of Ethereum.
Okay, what was the very first pop-up city? Because I've been hearing about them now.
Yes.
And I don't know what the first one is.
Okay, so the first one was Zuzalu. It happened in Montenegro in
That was the
2023.
first one?
Yes.
Oh my god, okay.
I was there.
That's so cool.
Yes, indeed. It's very cool.
Quick question. Before we dive into what the first pop-up city is, I'd like to know what they are, because when I first heard the term, I don't know, on the drive to Berkeley when I was in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and was told that my intuition that like, oh, a place like Burning Man was not it. Because that sounds like a pop-up city, right? It's enough people that they'll, get together and make a community very quickly. Yeah. But apparently that's not what it is. So what's a pop-up city, and then what was this first one?
I would say that pop-up cities are not like Burning Man, but now that you mention it, would kind of consider Burning Man as a sort of pop-up city adjacent concept.
Vindicated.
The way in which I describe it is it's definitely a new or novel format for conferences or intentional communities. And so the idea, you get a group of people who are interested in a set of topics and say, hey guys, we're all going to basically live here for 1 month or 2 months. So you choose, a town or a city or somewhere. And so everyone agrees to come and live there.
So by a town or a city, I'm assuming means someplace with a lot of rental rooms available?
Indeed, yes. So this usually happens in more remote areas that are also cheaper for attendees to access, that are also easy to access. And so the idea is, hey, we're going to do this 2-month long conference or set of conferences, and around those conferences, we are also going to have this sort of intentional co-living kind of element to it. And by co-living, it doesn't mean that they necessarily living in the same building, although that also happens because you run out of space. Everyone wants to come. But they are all in the same area. And so you have a couple of gathering spots, like everyone goes have breakfast at the same place every day. Everyone goes to the same co-working, etc.
Okay.
And then every week or every 2 weeks, again, this is very freestyle. There is a conference on a certain topic. So Zuzalo, for example, had zero knowledge. They had some like network state or startup society week. They had AI and they had longevity.
It sounds like the most exciting thing in the world for like people who are working on something.
Yes. Or who want to learn about one of these topics.
Yeah.
Yes, because how amazing it is that you get to live with a bunch of experts on the topic that fly there, basically usually just to speak at the conference, but some of them stay for longer. And so you get to, have breakfast with them every day, ask them all sorts of questions, just live around them and around other very, I want to say, agentic people who are working at the cutting edge of all of these fields.
So does Lighthaven then count as a pop-up city? Because it seems to check all those boxes.
I think it's too small to be a pop-up city.
Wait, first of all, the word pop-up is there because it tends to be a temporary. So it's not a pop-up city, but funnily, now that you mention it, I don't want to shill anything on the podcast, but
you are so welcome to shill things on this podcast.
I think I'm so happy about this because I love Lighthaven so much. I mean, the physical space and the community there, and we are actually organizing. Vitalism is actually renting or getting Lighthaven for themselves for a 2-month-long pop-up city focused on longevity. So this is in Berkeley. I'm super excited about that. So, and the idea is to have conferences, every week or every 2 weeks, each one of them focus on a different topic within longevity.
Then this is going to be going on for 2 months.
Yes.
When is this starting?
April. It's going to be in April and May.
Holy shit.
I'm so excited. And also this is going to be the one pop-up that's going to be closest to San Francisco. The closest one was Edge Esmeralda in Healdsburg, which also had like a full neurotech week that I heard was really good.
So if somebody is listening and wants to participate in the pop-up city, what the heck do they do?
They apply and pray, because they don't have that many spots.
Where do they apply at?
So Vitalist Bay is the name, and I think it's vitalistbay.com. But there's only 70 residential spots at Lighthaven, so at the main venue. But again, this happens at every single pop-up city. You always, again, run out of space, and so people usually have to find, their own accommodation nearby. But as I'm saying, there's like a main venue where, people live and people work, etc. And then other people can choose to move in closer, get their own accommodation, and then they just know where to find the people. Okay. And it attracts people usually from all over the world. That's one of the coolest things about pop-up cities. And by the way, pop-up cities have been so successful that now there's almost one every month, almost. So you can do a whole pop-up city tour.
Are they always on tech topics or tech focus, the pop-up cities?
The ones that I know of, yes, but I know of more and more artists who are getting interested in this. And some of them also have like art tracks.
If there's any artist listening that is doing a pop-up city, give me a call.
Yeah.
So this pop-up city, only 70 spots, residential spots in Lighthaven, but you're saying a lot of people are probably going to come, live nearby to somehow participate. Do they need to get vetted as well? Because I know Lighthaven is a closed campus.
Yes. This applies, I think, to all pop-up cities because, as an event organizer, you're putting a lot of work and spending a lot of money to make this happen. And so you want to make sure basically that everyone has a ticket. And also, for security reasons and alignment, you also want the community to be aligned. It's very important that everyone goes through the application process. Yeah. That's why I said you need to apply and get approved.
How did this work for the earlier pop-up cities? Because if you pick a small town, like a tourist town in the off-season with a lot of rooms, there's still all the locals that are around, right? Do they just mingle with everyone else?
So that was literally the case. As you said, that's how they chose the place in Montenegro. There were not that many locals. So that's why you find spots that are a little bit quiet. It can get a little bit boring for the people staying there for a month or two because there is not that much to do because you have to travel a little bit further out to get to, a city. There usually aren't many stores or restaurants or anything like that.
That's good though. It keeps them focused on the work, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. This is actually intentional. One of the editions, it was 2 weeks long, was held in Istanbul, one of the first ones after Zuzalo, and that was one of the comments from the organizers that they felt that the vibe was not the same because of what you just described. There's just too much kind of external noise. Whereas if you go to a place that's mostly empty, you have some certainty that whoever you bump into is part of the tribe, is in-group.
Yeah. Are you worried about that in Berkeley? Like, Berkeley is surrounded by in-group people, but there's so much to do, too. Like, people could spend every day out on the town if they wanted.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think Berkeley is going to be slightly more similar to Istanbul, but still a little bit more...
Yeah, it's definitely not like capital city.
So the thing is, at least in the case of Berkeley, the event will be held at the same spot where people are going to be living. And so that helps a lot. And the co-working. Yeah. So like all of this is going to happen in the same place. Yeah. So the thing in Istanbul is that people were, sleeping at like hotels and hostels and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then coming all together to this one event venue. And then they would have to find like restaurants to get all their food. And so you get to interact with the city more. You're not like this is not so much of an enclosement. I think Lighthaven is going to be a little bit closer than that, but without being overwhelming or claustrophobic.
Do you know how much it's going to cost to attend the city?
I should, but I don't. Okay. But I can tell you Vitalia passes were $500. Yeah, accommodation was maybe, I think rooms, like shared rooms, like 2,000, bigger rooms were 4,000, because actually Roatan is very expensive, which I was very surprised to learn, because I thought, oh, this is Honduras, everything must be super cheap. Yeah. And actually, no.
Huh. Why is it so expensive? Do you know?
Because American tourists like traveling there. Oh. I don't know. Okay. No, also, okay, one of the reasons also why it's so expensive, I don't understand why real estate is so expensive. I'm assuming maybe because it's hard to get workers there, but also for any food items, any items of any type, most of them need to be imported, usually from the US. Okay. So that adds a markup.
You mentioned an application process that would help ensure alignment along the people attending. Then you use the word tribe. And while I totally get like not wanting to have a 2-month conference where you've got 68 people who are all on the same page and 2 just crackpot dissenters who are there to ask a bunch of dumb, naive, and, well, what about this questions? Is there an effort to try and get people who disagree but are oriented in the same direction to these things? I'm trying to think of like if they did like an AI alignment one, would they invite Yudkowsky and
Jan LeCun?
Maybe. Who knows? It's the general question I'm asking though is like, would it encourage that kind of dissent, or would it say, look, we just want to actually solve the problem here, not like argue whether or not it's a problem? I guess that question answers itself, but I'm interested to hear your answer.
Well, first I will zoom out and tell you that it really depends. Every one of these pop-up cities has a different organizing team, and it's up to them how they want to run it. Some people are more inclusive, some people are more exclusive. In the case of Vitalist Bay, since they have very limited spots and they really care about making this productive, we're very ideologically aligned. So they really care about this problem. They're also dedicating their whole lives to this. I think it's more meant to be a breeding ground for all sorts of initiatives within this space. So it wouldn't make much sense, to have 10 people who are like, hey, I don't think this is possible, or I don't agree with that we should live more than 120 years, or aging is beautiful and we shouldn't do anything about it, and this is unnatural and we're playing God, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that would be a little bit counterproductive. And another...
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is more, I guess, for the people who are in the field or want to help the field grow, to sort of help each other.
Also, a lot of like crypto scammers would show up at these kinds of things if you didn't have some kind of gate to keep them out.
Yes, absolutely. Since you asked that question, the one application process for a pop-up city that I did find surprising was actually Balaji's for the network school in Malaysia. Balaji's he wrote this book called The Network State. I guess all these concepts are sort of interrelated, pop-up cities, network states, ZS. And so he planned this sort of pop-up city as a sort of pilot of what a incipient network state could look like. And in that case, the application process did make them disclose their stance on all sorts of political topics. So you have like different sliders, and you have to basically disclose where you stand or how you feel about like Elon Musk, or like Milei, or like accelerationism, or AI safety, or even the FDA. But if you read the book, he does explain that starting with a very tight-knit and highly aligned community is very important to set the culture. So
nice. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that especially if the goal is to get things done, you don't want to spend even 5% of your time arguing that what you're doing is worth doing.
Yeah. Going back to your previous question, I think one of the core differences between a festival and a pop-up city is that pop-up cities run for longer. You co-work there, you have a lot of activities, you also have conferences, right? Which is different from Burning Man and others like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love the idea. The productivity here will be insane.
Well, depends. If you, as an organizer, you host too many activities, then it's also harder for people to focus. Again, this depends so much on how the pop-up is organized and what the organizers decide to prioritize. In the case of Vitalis Bay, I know for sure that they want to prioritize productivity a lot. There has been a precedent for a longevity pop-up, which was actually the second ever 2-month-long pop-up city, and that was Vitalia, which I was talking about earlier, which also gathered a lot of longevity professionals and enthusiasts. They also had a startup societies conference that they didn't want to call it Network States Conference because Network State is a highly politically charged word.
Oh my God.
So you don't want to use a word like that in Honduras. But
interesting. I want to know more about this in just a minute.
Yeah, but that was a precedent, and I know of many collaborations that came out of that. A lot of projects. I was just talking about someone who now is in her third cohort of a fellowship called Muse Matrix, and I think they're actually planning a pop-up for academics. I think in the biospace. And there's a couple of others, but it also includes myself. So I met my co-founder at Vitalia. He stayed there for the first 4 months, and then he came back for July for the accelerator, and we were working on our own separate startups, but we both wanted to start a biohouse. I wanted to come visit SF again and explore it a little bit more, and he wanted to start a biohouse. So yeah, we got together, and it was definitely very productive. Like, we were able to put together all the materials we needed and release applications in like 4 days of just getting together in the evening while working on our own thing during the day. So definitely a very productive space. And as I said, I know of many other cases of people finding their investors, their next jobs, their employees, their mentors, etc.
When you went to Vitalia, you were still more along the interested enthusiast person, or were you already like professionally in the sphere?
I mean, that was my transition, right? Like, Vitalia was my first full-time position working in the longevity space.
How did you get into Vitalia?
So going back to Zuzalu, all of these things are connected. So first of all, another success case of a startup coming out of a pop-up was Vitalia, because the founders actually met at Zuzalu. I joined Vitalia as an events lead because during the previous year, I had actually started organizing so many events and conferences in the blockchain space. That was my area. And so, as I said, it was a great fit because I wanted to transition. I had a technical background in blockchain. I was highly involved with the blockchain community. I was organizing a lot of events, so I had community building experience. And I wanted to transition into longevity, get closer to biotech, learn more about bio to, in the future, potentially start my own biotech. So it just seemed like the perfect place to be, especially considering that they had an accelerator.
Yeah.
So one of the first things that I discussed with Nick, the CEO, when I was joining, I told him very clearly that my hope joining Vitalia would be to, in the future, potentially spin out a company through the accelerator. Yeah.
So all your organizing that you'd been doing for blockchain stuff before that, was that like volunteer work? Was that stuff you'd been paid for?
It was volunteering. This was the first time that I actually, did that as part of my job. Yeah, I didn't expect that. And I always mention this. When I was a software engineer, I would get so many offers to work as a developer relations, like developer advocate, all of these sort of roles where you're very social, a lot of community building work. And to me, that felt like almost like dirty because it was not technical. And I was like, I did not study computer science to go and do community stuff. And also, I really enjoyed coding. I really like being technical. So I was like, I'm never going to do that. It's like so dirty.
So it all starts with just being excited enough about something to volunteer and do a lot of it on your own time.
Honestly, yes.
And continue build from there.
Yes. My motivation, by the way, was that, again, I wanted to transition from software engineering. My ultimate goal, right, was to start my own startup, to be a founder. And so I started thinking, okay, what can I do to sort of improve my skills outside of software engineering, right?
Yeah.
So I moved a little bit more towards the management side, and ultimately, event organization, I saw it as an avenue to train basically CEO skills, because when you organize a conference, you do recruiting, you do fundraising, you do project management and people management, you do marketing, you might even have to do design, and tons of negotiation for the venue, for many other things. So at the end of the day, I was very motivated. When I started doing it, I realized how much I was growing my network by doing that, and how many opportunities were coming to me because I was putting myself out there. And then that's when I started actually valuing, I don't know how to call it, community work, no, like community building work, a bit more. Yeah.
Awesome. Another little specific object level question. I am seriously considering sometime in 2025 going down possibly to Mexico, possibly Prospera, get some stem cells shot up into my body. How optimistic are you about this particular method of slowing aging or regenerating the body?
I will forward this question to my Evitas co-founder, who's a specialist in stem cell biology.
Okay.
But the startup that he was exploring, or the startup idea that he was exploring in Prospera, this stem cell sort of marketplace, whatever, clinic, he did a ton of research on different providers. So the idea was to have a marketplace of different providers that would have treatments for different targets. And he wasn't very convinced.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he decided to drop the idea because he didn't want to put himself in a spot where he would be selling products that he personally wasn't very confident in their effectiveness. Okay. So I will forward your question also to other specialists that I know in the medical field that are longevity friendly. But yeah, I have to share that.
Okay.
That's a pretty telling answer. Not even that he thought that there may be promise there to keep investigating. It's like, no, I've taken a look. I've decided it's not really viable. Plus, it's not, I mean, I'm not a biologist, but I don't know exactly what would happen if I just took 100 cc's of stem cells and shot them into your arm, right? Like, they're not going to go to the parts that need them the most and, get stuff done, right? I think they need to be very well targeted.
there's a reason why you have to travel to Mexico or Prospera or other places like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's actually many reasons. Like it's hard to do research on the topic, but the main reason is that, again, like the body is a complex system, and its stem cell development is also very complex, and it's very hard what's going to happen once you inject those stem cells.
So you're saying that in addition to just the legal restrictions on what you're allowed to do with stem cells in the U.S., the other reason that it's not a popular medical venture here is that it can't get clearance by the FDA and AMA to say, yes, we're confident it does this.
Yes, but I also wanted to mention a very important point about all of this, and that this applies to many longevity treatments and why you need a place like Prospera to be able to develop them, as well as all sorts of other human enhancement treatments. The way the FDA works, you need to be targeting a specific disease for you to be able to get approval to go through with a trial, okay? So right now, a company reached out to me that's exploring gene therapies or a novel gene therapy that tries to mimic... Okay, let me put it a different way. There are some people that have been found to not be impacted by a lower number of hours of sleep. Their health does not seem to be impacted. Their energy levels, etc., do not seem to be impacted.
I went to high school with a girl like that, and she did fine on 4 hours a night. And for me, 4 hours a night I'd be a wreck on day 3.
Yeah.
Right. So some people have looked into this, into what is the genetic quirk that allows for this. And so recently this startup reached out to me because they might be interested in running their trials in Prospera for a gene therapy that would basically enable this effect, right?
Oh.
Yeah. That's,
can we volunteer for this?
that's very interesting.
Well, I don't want to speak for Steven. Can I volunteer for this?
I will.
And when it works for him, I'll volunteer.
I will put you in touch. But this is a really good example for a type of treatment that you will not be able to run trials for in the US because you are not targeting any specific disease. And so, and I mean, the reason why is it that way? Well, because they don't want you to perform trials on healthy people, right? It boils down to that at the end of the day. It makes sense. But then the problem is that aging is not considered a disease. And so you cannot technically test a drug for their impact on longevity or lifespan or health span. You usually use some like proxy markers, right? If you actually want to run a trial for a lifespan or health span or whatever, you just use some proxy target that you claim is what you're researching. There's a whole movement part of the field that advocates for, hey, we should declare aging a disease. And the reason behind that is exactly what I explained, because if aging was considered a disease officially, then we would be able to run these trials.
We'd be allowed to start treating it. Yeah, I think the distinction makes sense in the abstract, because otherwise, it's like we're just doing mad science at people to see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Is kind of the counter argument, but
also on that point, I want to clarify that Prospera is also not the Wild West. So to run trials there, you do have to submit protocol design or the documents for how you're going to run your protocol and have that approved by an IRB, an independent review board, which is basically like an ethics committee. So, people are not running around in Prospera with like 3 heads or like, I don't know. They are running around with all sorts of implants in their hand, but that's
pretty
it.
cool. Yeah, until you can make a compelling case that having 3 heads is better than having 1.
Yes.
Yeah, in the U.S., people get tired on not enough sleep isn't enough of a disease for people to give the green light to.
Yeah.
And saying, people slowly fall apart and eventually die also isn't enough to point at and say, this is a problem that sounds solvable. This is, I think, what won me over. I think I saw like a TED Talk by Aubrey de Grey or something where he really just analogized it to a disease. And that if people didn't age and then someone was, it would be like this most tragic loss of life and function imaginable. It's like, how come just because it's normal, we take it that it should be the way it is? And I was completely sold.
Yeah, the death trance, as he calls it.
I guess the FDA isn't sold yet. I didn't know about that explicit distinction, though, that they cared about you need to be treating a disease or presumably like a condition. You know?
Exactly. Also, for thoroughness purposes, I will mention that core problem with things that are being proposed, like declaring aging as a disease potentially, is that if that were to happen, literally every single person would be considered sick. So that would be a little bit problematic. And then...
Wait, why is that problematic?
Because then we could all collect disability for being sick. I mean, I'm sure there's some legal bullshit.
No, because there's no, like, where do you draw the line, right?
When you draw the line at when people stop aging.
They stop aging when they die.
I think you're younger than me and I'm younger than Eneasz. At what stage here are we like, this is when we step in and try and halt aging? Is it at age 5? Is it age 55?
Yeah, and then the other problem also with running longevity trials or lifespan extension is that we currently don't have reliable or very highly reliable markers for aging. And so right now, the only accurate way, reliable way to test if your drug or treatment is actually having an impact on lifespan is by waiting until the organism dies, which is not very feasible in the case of humans, considering our average.
Yeah, it would take us centuries to get through lots of trials if we had to wait for the average lifespan to go from start to finish.
Yeah, so obviously we want some proxies, some markers, so to analyze without having to wait for the organism to die. So we have aging clocks, right? But again, this is a very nascent field, so they're not super reliable at the moment.
So there isn't ways to test like what your metabolism levels are like or how efficiently you're running? I mean, you can tell the difference between a 40-year-old and a 20-year-old, right? Like, they can even tell you the difference. Like, yeah, I'm more tired now than I used to be. Or, like, wait to see on the DNA level that things are degrading. There's no way to test for those things?
I mean, there's, as I said, aging clocks, which can be either DNA methylation tests. Those are the most common. Or now some proteomic clocks, I think they're called, are also being developed. So there's multiple types. And they can tell you the age of your liver or the age of different parts of your body. And so if you actually implement certain lifestyle changes, you can see how those numbers change. The problem is that the number that you get or the result that you get is not deterministic enough, especially across brands or devices, for the FDA to accept that. Because if you are running a trial, you need to show that your treatment is having an impact on certain markers. And so if you cannot trust those markers because they're unreliable, because every time you do the test, you get if you do like 5 different tests at the same time, you get a different number, or you get a different number if you use tests from different providers, then the FDA is never going to accept that.
Well, at least there's other places that are working on this, like Prospera. And I'm sure that when another country or small city starts developing 200-year-old super soldiers, then the U.S. will be like, okay, you know what? Maybe we can rethink these guidelines.
So what is your general optimism around, like, within 20 years we'll be able to stop aging or stop the majority of the aging process?
Okay, that sounds too optimistic for me. So you
Okay.
did mention Aubrey at the beginning of the podcast, and it's true, he does get a lot of criticism, but making what some people think are outlandish claims, because he's been saying, I don't know, yeah, for like 15 years now, like, oh, we will reach longevity escape velocity in the next, like, I don't know, he was saying like 15 years or something, or 20 years. Most people disagreed with that. I'm not sure how to factor in AI, right? Like how much AI will help speed things up. Speaking to different scientists who actually work at the lab, they are not that optimistic because they think all the major bottlenecks are not on the software side of things, are not at the software level. They are more at the physical level, and we're actually quite far from reaching proper lab automation, useful enough levels or widespread enough levels of lab automation to have an impact. So if you're asking me, about my optimism on a timeline of 20 years for, I guess, longevity escape velocity, maybe, I wouldn't feel that optimistic, especially considering that, and by the way, this is one of the reasons also why Vitalia started and why I'm very excited about Vitalia. The fact that developing a new drug or treatment and going through the whole trial process with it to release it, to actually get it to people, takes between 10 to 15 years, okay, for each one, and more than $2 billion.
Damn.
So first of all, this is not accessible for most scientists, considering maybe, spinning out their, I don't know, PhD projects.
The 4-person startup is not going to get that.
It's just not a fundamental limit, but it is a hard limit as the current system is set up for new drugs to actually get to the public. Yeah.
But just in terms of pure science, like what if it's not getting to the public?
Right. Then how do you know it's actually working?
That's a fair point.
That does raise a good question. Like in principle, if someone said, "Hey, I cracked it. I've got it. I've taken the immortality serum," we wouldn't know for decades if it worked, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can make all the claims you want from the lab. Most likely, if you get extraordinary results, what has happened is that there was some issue when measuring the data. There was some error in your code, stuff like that. That's what tends to happen most of the time. Even if that were to actually happen, yes, you still need to run many, many tests. You do not need to go through the whole trial process. That is true, but you should at least get phase 1. Also, sorry, I'm going to correct myself. Clinical trials apply to humans. So you can technically, get some good results before you get to that point, but it's not going to be fully conclusive until you run trials for humans, I mean.
So your ultimate goal is completely eliminating aging among humans. This is what we're working towards. Do you think you'd get it in your lifetime? Like, when would you think it might happen?
I don't feel super comfortable speculating because my background is not in this topic, but I will share my intuition at least, which probably is highly influenced by actual experts that I have around me. I do not feel super optimistic about reaching longevity escape velocity during my lifetime, but I do feel somewhat optimistic about at least reaching some significant levels of slowing down or deceleration of the aging process. But now you can ask me, since this is a Bayesian conspiracy and we all want to be super rational, what do you mean by significant? Can you quantify that?
I wasn't going to ask you to. I take your intuition at face value. I wish it was the other way, but you're better informed and more in the loop on it than I am. Like if everyone that you knew was like, "Oh yeah, I feel like we're 15 years out," that would be awesome. But it sounds like they're not saying that.
In that case, I'm crossing my fingers for huge gains in the AI field, making us go faster.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe some of the techniques that are developed will help with cryopreservation or something, make that more viable.
Also, remember to take snapshots of your current physical self.
Yes. And since I know nobody is going to be able to do this right now, hey, maybe pause the podcast right now and set a reminder in your phone tomorrow at noon to go ahead and call up your doctor so you can get your blood drawn and at least write down these numbers.
Wait, but do not only get your blood tested and save those values. Do store your samples. Yes. Yeah. Do store your samples if you can.
Storing samples is really hard, I think, for the average person because that's expensive to start preserving all those things in a cryo facility. Like, we don't actually have biobanks yet, right?
They're not widespread, and that's what Rob is trying to solve, yes.
I have some samples of my body on ice somewhere, and it's not that expensive, but it's $100 a year. And if I were to start having this all store large quantities of bio stuff, then, yeah, I would hope that...
It's also, what you have currently stored isn't enough to reconstruct you.
Right.
It only contains half your DNA, basically. Yeah. You mentioned that when people get some awesomely breakthrough finding. Usually it's a problem in their code or their paper that they worked through.
Yes.
I will be in touch after this at some point in the next week or two about a possible solution to that problem.
Steven's working on this right now in his
Wow.
startup.
Wow. This is important.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's exciting.
Yeah, no, it's...
But I want to get the sales pitch right, and I don't have it yet, so...
I'm so excited that you have this exciting new job, Steven.
Me too. It should be fun.
Hey, you know how you said we shouldn't ask you political questions?
Yes.
I want to ask you 2 political questions.
Okay. I reserve the right to answer or not, choose to answer or not answer.
Absolutely fair. So this first one, honestly, this just happened yesterday evening, so you may not even have heard about it or know about it, but
Wow.
Jim O'Neill...
Yes.
You know about Jim O'Neill?
Yes, I posted about it. I congratulated him on Twitter. This is such a win for Longevist.
Yeah.
So yeah, for listeners of the podcast, Jim O'Neill was the CEO of the Sense Foundation, which is actually the nonprofit that Aubrey de Grey started to work on reaching, as I said, I keep saying it, longevity escape velocity, because his new nonprofit is actually called Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. So very, very exciting news, having someone who is a longtime longevist in the government.
So for people who don't know, yesterday Trump released a statement saying that he was tapping Jim O'Neill to be the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Working right next to RFK Jr., so it's hard to say how much he'll get done.
Well, yeah.
Okay, actually, we were discussing this in our private longevity groups, and some people said, like, oh, the government, things do not change. But I still said I think this is still a big win in terms of ideological influence. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, and it's better than not having him there.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say. I've never heard of the guy. I saw the note here that he reads ACX, and apparently Aubrey de Grey hates him, but so that actually does speak to something.
Okay.
But
my longest conversation with Jim O'Neill was actually discussing consciousness, all sorts of different thought experiments around consciousness at an AI consciousness meetup. So I have good priors on him being very aligned on different fronts with the whole, I would say, transhumanist community.
Well, and just having a government official and a cabinet member, nonetheless, that can follow a conversation like that, nevertheless participate is, I'm going to count that as a win where I can take it, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I know he's also involved in other projects at the level of what I explained. I know he's involved with different projects that are definitely at the cutting edge in human enhancement.
So I want to say, on the one hand, I was extremely happy when I heard about it. And then quickly thereafter, I heard that the people at Sens kind of hate him. And Aubrey de Grey says he's horrible. Someone else said he's a psychopath. And I'm like, oh no, is this another Sam Altman or Sam Bankman-Fried situation where they're brilliant and do great things but are fucking crazy? Is this a bad thing? Is he a psycho? Do we need to guard our drinks when he's around?
I can't comment on any of this because I am too close.
Okay.
I am too close to many of the people involved. Don't take that as a yes, though.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I won't provide commentary.
Okay. And then the last question, you mentioned network states.
Yes.
I've been trying to figure out what the heck a network state is, and I don't want to be dismissive, but as far as I can tell, it's a bunch of people in a Discord server. What is a network state?
Well, it used to be a bunch of people in a Discord server. I guess now the Discord people are meeting up in Malaysia. Baby steps.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is a network state? First of all, there's a whole book on this. So Balaji kickstarted this whole field. It's not yet a field, actually. It's a pre-field. He popularized this concept and he coined the term network state when he released this book called The Network State in 2022. So this is actually very recent. Okay, give him time. So Balaji Srinivasan, by the way, is the former CTO of Coinbase. But a very interesting data point here is that his background is actually in genomics. He is a bio guy, and he is a longevist, and he has a lot of critical thoughts about the FDA.
Right.
So last time Trump ran for president, Balaji was his pick for... I don't know what the technical name of the role is, but basically he was going to kind of be running the FDA or something like that. But
he was considered.
Yeah.
Trump considered appointing him as FDA commissioner,
Okay, so thanks so much.
I'm reading his Wikipedia. I've had his Wikipedia page open for a while since he mentioned his book.
Nice. Okay, yeah. So I think this is very relevant in the context of this podcast to mention, because a lot of people only know him as a crypto bro. They have no idea that he actually comes from a bio background. Balaji, as I said, he wrote the book, and what he proposes there is. He doesn't agree with the way things are being handled right now in many countries, especially the USA. He thinks he can do better. The book is a sort of playbook for how to go about creating your own, instantiating your own spaces in the real world. Okay, I'm going to give you the actual, his description for what a network state is. A network state it starts as a highly aligned online community that gets together to pool resources with the goal of acquiring territory.
Okay.
With the ultimate goal of getting that territory recognized by existing nation states.
Huh.
Yes.
Like the Mormons, I guess? When they went and settled in Utah, and eventually the government was like, all right, cool, Utah's a cool place, you can be one of our states?
Well, in this case, that would be a city still running under legal constraints from a sort of governing body that's at a layer above them. Okay. But what Balaji wants is to create spaces where you are the only ruler.
See, that...
I don't want to say ruler.
I don't want to use
the word. Where you can have full autonomy over over your jurisdiction.
That just sounds like a nation.
Basically.
Okay. And it's going to be really hard to get most nations to give up some of their territory.
Actually, this is one of the hardest part for any of these things, and I'm going to say things because besides network states, which don't really exist in the real world right now, there's a set of interrelated topics or concepts, which are charter cities, ZEDs, as I mentioned, SECs, which are special economic zones, startup societies, network states, and seasteading. This all starts, I guess, with special economic zones.
Oh dear. With the special economic zones and the ZEDs, one of the selling points is like you tell the nation, we're not trying to take this territory from you. We just want to do really cool things here without as many regulations. It'll bring huge benefits to your population, your government, etc. If it starts getting out that they actually do want to secede and have their own nation, this is going to make it much harder to get those charter cities going, right?
Did I not mention that they didn't call the conference the Network State Conference for a reason?
I see.
Indeed. So charter cities, special economic zones, ZEDs, they do not have any pretension of becoming an independent state. The agreement or the idea here is that the core governing body basically delegates some parts of the governing of this area to an external body that is maybe a little bit more specialized. But the end goal is to have still that territory be part of the bigger territory of the host country and just stay as a part of it.
Okay. So they still get military protection from the larger country.
Indeed.
Well, it sounds like a network state, too, from what you just said and what Claude laid out as far as what the guy put in his book, that it could be small communities all around the country or the world. So it's not like they're trying to cede the northern half of Colorado for their own thing, right? It's distributed in a way that I think would be non-threatening to the country's governing agencies.
It sounds like they want to be all in the same place, in a single geographic area, right?
I mean, the network state is called like that because the idea is to create a network of different spots like that around the world, where if you become a citizen of one of these network states with your passport for that network state, you would be able to access any other place in the world that's annexed, that's associated. Yeah. So it's sort of like a distributed city where it's much easier to innovate much faster. Balaji cares a lot about integrating technology at the core of all of these new cities. He cares a lot about blockchain, obviously. Other formats that I mentioned, just to give a brief explanation. So I think it all starts with special economic zones. That was the original inspiration. So, you have Shenzhen in China, which had massive, I wish I could quote the numbers. You can ask Perplexity very quickly, but the economic growth there was absolutely explosive. It was like the GDP growth from the 1980 to 2000 something was like 6 times as much as a national one. So that was a successful case, right? Yeah.
Since these separate cities throughout the world are all part of one state, then if you're a citizen of one of them, part of the objective is that you can travel freely between them.
Yeah, so I hope you can see now how pop-up cities are the sort of mini version or sort of a working prototype of how a network state could get instantiated.
Yeah, but nations are going to hate that. They want some control over who comes in and out of their borders.
That's probably true, but I imagine in the short term, you'll just have to get a legitimate passport for the countries that you're coming in and out of, and then whatever bonus stamps for your network state.
Yeah, I could see ways that it would work, obviously, but it would be a constant negotiation between the network state and the host countries.
I'm only really hearing about this for the first time today, but I imagine that's a consideration that they've thought of and is ongoing, right?
Thing is, the more vulnerable party in this deal seems to be the network state, because they don't have the guns. I hate to pick on Prospera right now, but since Honduras recently elected a whole bunch of socialists, and they're going in and trying to, strong arm money out of them, like shutting down offices. If a country starts becoming hostile to the city, they're captive within them, right? Like, they can surround them, they can take them hostage. Like, what are you going to do? Fight with the military you don't have? Maybe you could try to get the host countries of the other nations you're in to get involved. It just sounds like you're setting yourself up to, I was going to say, to be at the mercy of your host country, but that's already the case for anybody that lives anywhere.
For a while, I had this kind of like cognitive shorthand that if I could spot a fatal flaw in a well-regarded idea or concept or whatever, if I could spot it in 10 seconds, then I was probably missing something.
Yeah, it's already been thought of.
However, it's also true that sometimes when you just come in with fresh eyes, you're like, wait, and this also isn't like someone coming in with like, attacking something as foundationally solid as like whatever, biological evolution or something, right? Where it's like, if you think you've spotted the flaw in evolution, trust me, someone would have seen it by now. This network state thing is 2 years old, and this could be the hurdle that they never get over.
I will say the whole idea of the network state receives a lot of criticisms. Criticism, yeah. I will add that.
I finally got what it meant, and it just tripped all the things in my head. And I'm like, I know other people have thought about this already. I was just thinking out loud, like, oh my god.
Well, and you don't want to,
be awesome.
Not be on the short list of being invited in.
I actually think your question was a really good question.
Which one?
About the network states being at the mercy of the host country.
Okay.
And one of my immediate thoughts was, of course, the seasteading people here would say, "This is why we want to build on the sea, so we don't have."
Or anybody can attack us.
Exactly. Like,
worked out great for Andrew Ryan.
Andrew Ryan? Oh my god, from BioShock?
oh.
Yeah.
I had to make one nerd reference at least at some point. We went all the way past genetically splicing lizards into people, and I didn't mention Spider-Man, so...
Right. Don't ask me about my feasibility estimates for converting humans into Spider-Man. But bioengineering is a very interesting field, so... Yeah, so the closest we have right now is would be something like Prospera, right? For me, the most exciting part about all of these potential cities or territories is actually this whole concept of a longevity network state. This is not an official term, like different people do mean different things. Brian Johnson, I guess, has popularized it the most. In his case, he focuses more on the lifestyle side of things. I think about this more from the regulatory perspective, as I said, like accelerating biotech innovation. Imagine this community that, as I said, is highly aligned on this front of, hey, let's defeat aging and let's do everything that we can following the latest scientific findings to individually at an individual level try to maximize our chances at reaching our maximal lifespan or health span, but also on the other side helping biomedical innovation. From the lifestyle perspective, imagine having this city that you can go to where healthy living is enforced, so you have no access to unhealthy snacks. Everything that you're eating, has been like tested. Like, for example, Brian Johnson is like testing all the food that he's considering using for his Blueprint brand. He's testing all the food for like heavy metals and like microplastics and all sorts of different things. So imagine having access to a city that you go to where you know that like all of the food that you're eating is being tested, all of the materials that you have access to, etc. And also you have access to the latest longevity interventions. So, you could have experts living there, doctors that are highly specialized. You could have access to metformin and rapamycin, etc. much more easily than otherwise, and quick, easy access to all sorts of measuring devices for your different markers. And also a community that makes you accountable, that you learn from, all sorts of educational programs.
Yeah.
How beneficial would this be for you as an individual and potentially for the field as a whole, if you also include things like, a longevity biotech accelerator and clinics? That proposal does seem very attractive to me, but I personally am most interested in how do we make this happen more quickly. Not the network state part specifically, but the solving aging more quickly, and I believe that longevity network states can be part of that.
When you describe a utopia and then ask how would I like to live there, it sounds great.
Yes.
So.
And you could also align people on other fronts. For example, I would say a lot of the groups that are following the space of network states are more aligned on other topics like libertarianism, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, movements like abolish the FDA are also quite libertarian. But yeah, what I'm saying is like longevity is an example. You could also have a Mormon network state. You could also have a, otaku network state. You can align people on any front you want.
I think in a basically accurate way, with the caveat that they're literally not networked, Amish communities basically do this. They share a value set. They're all over the place. They live peacefully within their parent countries.
Well, no, they're not all over the place. They're mainly just in Pennsylvania.
Aren't they in various other places, or is it only there?
I think it's pretty much only there. There may be one other community somewhere on the East Coast, or two small ones, but...
Is it all one big community in Pennsylvania? Because my argument still stands as long as there's several small ones.
There may be several small
ones.
We'll ask David next time we talk to him, Yusuf.
Yeah, but it lacks the cohesion and ambition of a real network state, so...
Definitely not the cohesion, but yes. I wanted to add, so for the example that I was giving of a potential longevity network state, I also wanted to add, having easy, quick, cheap access to longevity biobanks. And you could even enforce certain things like automatically sharing medical data, like anonymized medical data. Because right now this is also one of the main bottlenecks in research, is having access to this data. Also, other things like, this one would be a little bit draconian, but you could force people to participate in a certain number of clinical trials per year, or to have, some alternative to that. Like, okay, if you don't want to sign up for clinical trials, then you can instead, contribute in some other way.
It's like paying your taxes. Any society expects something of its members.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good place to leave it. We should tell people how they can apply to Vitalia City or Vitalia Bay. So let's start with that one.
Right. For Vitalia City, that is the one in Prospera. And they're actually, I didn't mention this, but they're actually hosting a pop-up in January and February. So by the way, there's this like perfect timing. You can go to one and then the other. Vitalia City, the website is vitalia.city. Apply there. You can mention Bayesian Conspiracy Podcast. I think that's going to score you some points.
Oh, neat.
For getting in.
Cool.
I will tell them about it. For alignment, community alignment. And then for Vitalis Bay, I believe is vitalisbay.com. And same thing. There should be a very easy apply button. And feel free to mention the podcast, because personally I would definitely use that as a marker of alignment.
How would somebody apply to spend a 4-month shift in your group house that you're running?
Right. Okay. So there it's avitashouse.bio. I guess it's easier for people to check the description and click there. We're active on Twitter, so we announce all of our events. Maybe that's easier if you want to check out the house, meet some of the members, maybe come to one of our events that we host. And yes, as I said, we're going to have rotational cohorts. So avitashouse.bio, and you will find the application page.
Any other things?
Yes, but it's like, I think that's enough plugging things.
Plug one more. Go for it.
Okay, another project that I'm excited about that's also starting in January in San Francisco is the SF Frontier Tower. So this team is buying, again, I'm really passionate about intentional communities and third spaces because I see the value of them, especially the ones that are very focused on technological innovation. That's my core passion. Yeah, I didn't mention it, but basically starting January, there's going to be this full building with 16 floors where half of them are going to be each one dedicated to a different technological topic. Right now, they're in conversation with different community leaders because the topics will depend on what communities are active in SF that are able to bring enough members. So there's going to be a full longevity floor that's actually tied with potentially run by Vitalism. So out of those 16 floors, there's going to be a longevity floor, potentially also a biotech floor. They might get merged. This is still in talks. There's also going to be a neurotech area. But I'm really excited about this because the organizations that I mentioned throughout the podcast are going to be involved in this, most likely. I really think this is the way to accelerate things in different fields, which is get people together, get people to help each other, also to build, right? To just sit down and grind. So I also care a lot about having spaces that are conducive to flow and focus. And so I think the SF Frontier Tower is going to be that in SF. It's going to act as a community hub where people can just drop by and find people who are highly aligned. And as I said, these projects are all somewhat interconnected. So yeah.
Awesome.
Hope
And when
to
does
see
that
you
start?
all there. This one starts in January. So timelines, January and February is the Vitalia pop-up and the SF Frontier starts. So if you can't leave San Francisco, you can join from here. Or if you can go to Roatan, I highly encourage checking out the pop-up. And then April and May is Vitalis Bay in Berkeley at Lighthaven.
Finally, was there anything we really should have asked you that you would have wanted to talk about and we forgot to ask?
I only wanted to mention, since I think charter cities are an important concept and I didn't really talk about them, just mention that the same concept that we explained about delegating decisions on things like regulation, the judicial system, taxation, etc., that applies to charter cities. So in this case, a similar model, which is not quite a charter city but was an inspiration, was Hong Kong. So that I think charter cities are a very interesting concept. And again, the first actual instantiation of a charter city is Prospera with the SEDE model. They also act as a sort of precedent for network states. So I think I wanted to mention that in case it's helpful for people to find more information through the keyword. And then the last one, I just think it might be interesting for your listeners to be aware that within the quote-unquote longevity space, there's all sorts of subgroups or subcategories. So if you meet someone who tells you they are into longevity, before you say, me too, try to figure out if it is just healthy eating and quote unquote holistic approaches. I don't even know what that means. They're referring to, or if they are using different molecules, or if they're even a little bit more hardcore and are down for, I don't know, any forms of like gene therapies or stem cell therapies, and even more radical than that is whole body replacement or
Anywhere from granola and yoga to I am making brain dead clones of me.
Yes, that is perfect. You have put it perfectly. It's exactly like that. Exactly like that.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Zoe, this is great. Thank you so much for coming. For coming on the show. I really appreciate it and really love talking to you. Hope we get to meet in person, and definitely hope we get to talk again soon.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
See you.
Okay, Stephen, one final thing. This just came out 2 days ago, so hot off the presses. Lightcone, which is the company which owns both Lighthaven and LessWrong.com and has been running them for a number of years now, is in a bit of a funding crunch. They look like they need $3 million to make it to the end of next year, and they're doing a fundraiser right now. I think LessWrong.com is amazing and has done a lot to change the world. It certainly changed my life drastically. Lighthaven itself is a wonderful place with just a great shelling point in real life of rationalists. We've talked about it a lot recently. As part of the fundraiser, one of the things they promised in the initial post that went up 2 days ago is that if you donate $1,000, you will get your name on a plaque on a bench somewhere. I was like, oh, cool, I'm totally doing that. And they sold out immediately. There's currently 13 benches, and all 13 of them have been claimed. I believe they're still going to be doing things like letting people put plaques on bookshelves or something out here for $1,000. So anyway, there is a fundraiser going. We'll put a link in the show notes. I myself am throwing in $1,000 as well. A couple months ago, somebody on Twitter said, I think 20 years from now, people are going to look back on Lighthaven as being like the Bell Labs of the 2020s. And I think that's probably the case. This place is just going to be big in the future. And I don't mind having my name on a small piece of it somewhere.
Awesome. I love it. And how much say they need by when?
$3 million to get them to the end of next year, I think, or maybe some bit into 2026.
Oh, wow.
And they should be going revenue positive somewhere in 2026.
And I have to mention, too, that keeping LessWrong.com alive, I mean, that's going to be on the order of maybe hundreds of dollars a month. So, like, this all sounds great. I will also donate to this charity. But I got to think most of it's going to Lighthaven just because keeping a website running is not expensive.
I know they have at least 2 full-time devs working on it, and like in Berkeley, those are over $100,000 a year.
Okay, yeah, that's where all that money's going then. I mean, in that case, all that said, great. I'm glad you brought it to attention, and check out the link in the show notes to throw in some money if you can.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, buddy.
We wanted to hit some feedback, yes?
Yes.
No, let's do the Guild of the Rose first, and then we'll do some feedback.
Deal. It's a vibrant community dedicated to personal growth and self-improvement. And they've got a unique system that blends practical life skills, mental, physical wellness, and rational thinking. The Guild offers weekly workshops and supportive cohorts to help you achieve your full potential. Whether you're looking to enhance your career, boost your creativity, or expand your knowledge, the Guild of the Rose provides the tools and community you need to succeed. Join the Guild and start your journey towards a better you today at guildoftherose.org.
Absolutely. It is not as intense as living with a bunch of people for several weeks and doing everything with them. On the other hand, it lasts for as long as you want. Many people have been in the guild for years now. And if you move, that's fine because it's an online community. You get to see them every week. It's an important service.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's got the perk of being remote. You know, you don't have to take off 2 months of work to go to a retreat at Lighthaven or something. So,
and it won't cost you several $1,000s.
Yes, it costs very little. Really, just do check it out.
Yep, and link in our show notes if you would prefer that route.
That's right.
So it has been, I think, 2 days since we recorded with Zoe. And wouldn't you know it, in between the recording and us talking about the feedback now, I found a little interesting thing that is relevant to charter cities, which I think I just have to throw in here now because it's kind of cool.
Cool.
Noah Smith over on his blog mentioned up in Canada, there's a lot of lands near cities or adjacent to cities, which are Indian tribal lands. They are currently building absolutely massive housing structures on them. Since they're governed by Indian laws, they don't have the same regulations that prevent building. They don't have all the NIMBY restrictions. Some developers went up to them and were like, look, can we pay you a whole lot of money and build a lot of housing on this land? And the tribes were like, yeah, sure, that sounds great, actually. So now those cities are actually going to have a whole bunch more housing built on them. Noah Smith says that actually this kind of thing happens in the U.S. too. We are all well acquainted with the Indian casinos, but I think one of the first Tesla dealerships was on Indian land because it got around regulations on whether a manufacturer of a car can sell that car to a consumer. Why do we need that regulation? I don't know. Noah points out that it's probably possible for various American cities to turn over parts of their land to tribal jurisdiction. So in the future, we could have little mini charter areas within our own cities. Use the fact that we have these carve-outs for the Indian lands within our actual constitution. As long as it's their land, it looks like they can do what they want on it, including letting other people build stuff on it for a fee. If we want things near our cities, we might even be able to be like, hey, here's this little section that we are now giving over to the local Indian tribe, and then they can administer it with their less crazy regulations, and we can pay them a fee in order to build things on it. So thank God for some workarounds.
That's kind of cool and a fun way to think about approaching how to solve that branch of the problem.
We have some other feedback from the episode, just the previous episode, where we were talking about the illusion of moral decline.
Yes. It was pointed out to me on the Discord. One was that there are a couple cool things you can do at home to look at. You can kind of do your own little double slit experiments with hair strands or pencil lead and hold them up next to each other and shine a laser pointer through them and look at the diffraction pattern, which is kind of cool. So, which reminds me to plug the Discord. So people posted videos of themselves doing it. It looks great. And so yeah, the Discord link is also in the show notes.
And it was pointed out that a CD or DVD is basically a diffraction grading mirror, which is why they reflect back rainbows.
Yes, that was cool too. And here I thought it worked like a fancy record, which maybe it does, but a record for light instead of sound.
Right. I mean, they literally work off lasers instead of needles.
Oh man, science.
It's great stuff.
Yes. Oh, but as far as the moral decline thing, so I didn't know until it was pointed out to me that shortly after this paper was published, or this blog post was published in 2023, Scott Alexander wrote a pretty, I mean, scathing isn't really his tone, but a pretty no-holds-barred review where he took basically every objection you made and several you didn't and pointed out that they don't really address any of those. My favorite, I think, that he points out is that none of the studies cited use words like God, religion, elders. There are a handful of others, like alcohol use or chastity before marriage. Like a lot of things that people you imagine in the 1950s would have put high on their moral scale. You know, church attendance goes down 75%. They're going to be like, of course the world is worse now, right?
Yeah.
If it's been 70 years past and they look around at church attendance compared to when they were kids. So, yeah, it seems like they missed some stuff. That is to say that Gilbert and Mastrioni might have missed some important bits there. I'm glad that post exists just because someone needs to entertain these questions, and they did actual science at it, and it started the conversation, which is the whole point.
He made the interesting point that a lot of people seem to have their morality kind of set as they're developing, and then morality changes. And so to them, it seems like it's declining because we might think it's great that people are much more liberated now to do drugs if they want to and have sex what they want if they want to. But people in the past would have thought that was terrible. And he said he was particularly incensed that they quoted, I think it was Livy from back in the Roman times, complaining about the kids these days, because he said, yeah, if you look at it, his moral system has been completely shattered. No one cares about properly respecting the paterus familias and about the nobles showing the correct noble oblige to the peasants. Like, that's just not anything anyone cares about. His system is completely destroyed. He's right in his moral framework.
Yeah, I get where he's coming from, but I think that it still works as an opening quote just to show that like people have been saying this for thousands of years. And yes, some people have been right over the course of thousands of years. I think it's just that kids these days is a thing people have been saying since we invented writing. But yeah, he was right.
Yeah.
And so yeah, his morality did decline all the way into oblivion. So
can I pull out a few things that I think were relevant and interesting that were in Scott's post?
of course.
Okay, well, he pointed out that, first of all, crime is up by more than 2.5 times since the 50s. We have a lot more crime now than we did then. Under that metric, morality is definitely worse. But some things are better, and he says it's weird that the polls don't pick that up, that the thing they kept hammering is that things are more or less the same and nothing has really changed all that much. And he said, hold on a second. Why don't the polls from the 50s pick up that black people are treated a lot better now than they were in the freaking 50s when they legally could not enter certain restaurants, or use certain bathrooms or water fountains? Why doesn't it pick up that today gay people are treated much better than they were? What the heck is going on with these polls if half the population doesn't realize that gay people are treated so much better now?
I have to think that those polls must just be the people who are like under 20 years old.
His conjecture is that either the methods are too weak to notice that there's been improvement in gay rights and African American conditions since the 50s, or because these moral improvements have been counterbalanced by other moral declines. So there's like a net zero gain. And he says either way, it doesn't really reflect well on their thesis.
Agreed. And yeah, as far as the first point that you made, I think that fits into what I was saying, that like the metrics weren't good enough, because I have to assume that anyone who says gays aren't treated better now than they were in the 50s doesn't know what they were treated like in the 50s. Right. And so I think that it's probably, kids that are on, entering these surveys who were born like after 2000, where, I mean, a handful of people were still like famous people were still coming out in the 2000s, but it was no longer, I mean, it was falling out of taboo. I mean, but you and I remember in the 90s and 2000s when people were, oh my gosh, this person's gay, etc.
Yeah.
That's no longer like the revelation that it is. Like this, it's just it's totally allowed, which it should be. But I think people forget that within living memory of people that they know, it was a socially taboo thing to oh my goodness, you're a homosexual.
Yeah.
But I still maintain that it has value as a conversation starter. So now that this rebuttal is here, they can do a follow-up and answer questions, regarding things like sex, marriage, divorce, child rearing, drugs, alcohol, loyalty, patriotism, respect for elders, hard work, laziness, religion, or anything about God. Which, when you think of, how the average person looks at morality, that's got to encompass a lot of it for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And those were all completely absent from the ones they found. They were working with the data they had, but I think they jumped to too strong of conclusions.
You did mention it's a conversation starter, and I did actually have a conversation started by someone who listened to the podcast. A friend over here, John Marcus, had an interesting take that we had not come up with. He said, maybe it's just that actually people get more moral as they age. We all know when you start out as a child, you don't understand what morality is at all. And that's part of the project of raising a child, is to teach them how to function in society in a pro-social way. So he says, maybe this continues into later adulthood. We get more moral as we age, and we start becoming bothered by things that we weren't bothered by before. And so things seem worse now, even though there was nothing that changed externally. It was just our sensitivity to what's acceptable or not has changed.
I think that's a good observation. I think part of that was encompassed, I mean, like sort of in the joke at the end of the post where he had said, morality peaked the year we were born and has been downhill ever since. Yeah. But he didn't articulate it the way that John here has. And I like that. I live near, I like the stretch of street I live near. There's no street lights, so there's good star viewing and stuff. And it's usually quiet, but it's 3-ish miles that is punctuated by the occasional stoplight, but it's otherwise just a straight stretch up and down hills, and it's great for racing if you're that kind of asshole. And so people are doing that out there somewhat frequently. And as a kid, that wouldn't bother me. I'd probably be out there participating, actually. As a curmudgeonly old man, I just want to shake my fist and tell them to get off my lawn because they're going way too fast. It's making way too much noise, and I'm trying to fall asleep. Damn it! So you're right. As we all turn into grumpy old men, our sense of morality changes a bit. So
Well, as kids, we have very little to lose, and the older we get and the more established we get, the more we have to potentially lose by people being antisocial. Also, a lot of people, once they start having kids, actually care a lot more about crime rates because their kids cannot defend themselves. And when you're a young adult, it's not as bad. You can maybe fight off an attacker or do something, but you really fucking care about crime when someone absolutely defenseless that you care about is in the world.
yeah, the base rates of crime are higher for sure, but any individual is still very unlikely to be a victim of a violent crime in their life.
And it's still better than it was in the 80s. 80s had a really bad crime rate.
We'll include the link to Scott Alexander's post here.
I think that's all the feedback that we had.
Yep.
Because our episode went really long, which was great. I had a really good time.
Me too. It was awesome. Really interesting stuff. I wish it could have gone longer, but I was running up on a hard time limit near the end, and 2 hours is probably around the peak of what we do. But I definitely want to talk to her again. So
yeah, at 2 hours we're starting to hurt. We're like, okay, I need to take a break.
Yeah.
Since it was a fairly long episode, I think we're putting off the regular Less Wrong post until next time. Yeah.
That sounds good to me.
All right, cool. So for next time, for real this time, we are going to be reading the Less Wrong posts, No Individual Particles, and Identity Isn't in Specific Atoms.
Perfect.
And finally, we have to do the most important part of the show.
Oh, yeah. Favorite part of the show. This week's special shout out goes to Dev Clark.
Thank you, Dev Clark. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, it means a lot. And I know we him and ha every time trying to think of unique ways to give our supporters a special shout out, but we're going to need to buy a new mixer for the multi-microphone setup that we have. I think it's the original one we got when we started the show, so it's had a good life.
8 years ago.
Yeah. It's had a good run, but it's fallen apart. So things like this help us to keep the lights on, keep things running around here, and it just means a lot. So thanks again, Dev. You rock.
Yeah, highly appreciated. Maybe we'll see you in a charter city or a pop-up city sometime.
And if you are in one that are around, by all means, reach out and we'll hang out. It'd be great.
Hell yes. Thanks for joining me yet again, Stephen. I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Sounds like a plan.